He was just a cop until the day he chose love over the law. Thomas Avery had spent 2 decades enforcing the rules, carrying a badge, and grieving the family he never had. Then came the call. 6 black girls, orphaned and unwanted, were about to be split apart by the very system sworn to protect them. He could have walked away. Most would have. But Thomas did something unthinkable. He took them all in, a single white man adopting 6 black daughters, in a town that didn't want to understand. He faced whispers, suspicion, and the quiet sting of isolation. But when they picked Thomas Avery, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know he was the kind of father who would braid hair with trembling hands, fight back against a biased school system, and stand tall when cancer came for him. What came next wasn't just redemption. It was a legacy that changed lives across generations. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. A warm spring breeze moved through the trees of Chestnut Hollow as Thomas sat on his porch, cradling a newborn in his arms. Inside, 6 remarkable women prepared dinner. His daughters, once unwanted, now unstoppable. For 20 years, Thomas Avery wore his badge with quiet pride, patrolling the sleepy streets of Chestnut Hollow like a man carrying invisible weight. The death of his wife, Elaine, had left a silence in his home that no radio static or police chatter could fill. Their dream of having children faded with her final breath, leaving Thomas drifting, faithful to duty, detached from life. Then, one autumn evening, a call came through that shattered his routine forever. An emergency at a run-down duplex on the edge of town. Reports of children left alone, no guardian in sight. Thomas expected the usual heartbreak, neglect, confusion, paperwork. What he found instead were 6 little girls, huddled together on a stained carpet, their eyes too quiet for their age. The oldest, barely 12, stood up, shielding the others. "They didn't come back," she whispered. "Our parents. There was a crash." Thomas radioed for backup, but even as protocols kicked in, something in him froze. These girls weren't just another case file. They were frightened, vulnerable, on the edge of being lost to a system that might never bring them back together. He overheard a social worker mutter, "It'll be impossible to place them all in one home." Another replied, "And with their background, it's going to be hard." A slow fire lit in Thomas's chest. Without thinking, he spoke, "What if I took them?" The room fell still. Even he seemed surprised by the words. A single man, white, a cop, offering to raise 6 black girls? The questions were instant. The warnings came fast. But Thomas only saw children who had no one, and a house that had been empty for too long. "They need a home," he said quietly, "and maybe I do too?" What would you have done in his shoes? That night, as the youngest girl reached up to touch his cheek and simply asked, "Are you going to be our new dad?" Thomas felt something long dead stir awake inside him. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was purpose. And sometimes, purpose walks into your life when you least expect it, wrapped not in certainty, but in need. The first morning in Thomas Avery's home didn't begin with sunshine and smiles. It began with tangled hair, spilled cereal, and the uneasy silence of strangers trying to survive under one roof. 6 little girls, Nia, Camille, Jordan, Tessa, Maya, and baby Hope, stood in a kitchen that felt nothing like home, watching a man who barely knew how to use a toaster try to pour warmth into their lives. Thomas was used to commands, not lullabies. His hands, trained for restraint, now fumbled with barrettes and backpacks. Nia, the oldest, watched him closely, as if trying to decide whether this man in uniform could really be trusted with their fragile world. He tried to braid Maya's hair that morning, God help him, but it turned into a knot so tangled she cried. And he cried too, quietly, in the bathroom mirror, overwhelmed by how much he didn't know. At the local school, parents stared as he walked 6 black girls to the entrance, Whispers followed them like shadows. One woman muttered, "Is he their caseworker?" Another said, "That can't be their real dad." The sting of it stayed with him long after the bell rang. That night, over a chaotic dinner of burnt lasagna and spilled milk, Camille asked him, "Why'd you pick us?" Thomas paused, fork in hand. Because someone needed to. It wasn't poetic, but it was true. Yet every smile was hard-won, every hug an earned miracle. Church was worse. He'd brought them to the chapel he and Elaine once attended, an all-white congregation frozen in polite disapproval. The pastor shook his hand. The pews, however, stayed distant. The girls noticed. "Do they not like us?" Jordan asked. Thomas had no answer that wouldn't break their hearts, so the next week they tried the black church across town. The music was loud, the warmth was louder. By the second Sunday, the girls danced. By the third, they called it home. Can you imagine stepping into a world where even your love is questioned because of what you look like? Thomas was learning fast. Parenting wasn't about fixing. Sometimes it was about sitting in discomfort and showing up anyway. He wasn't just learning how to be a father, he was learning how to be brave in ways his badge had never required. And as the years passed, the rhythms of life slowly transformed the Avery household from chaos into something resembling harmony, though never without tension. The girls grew, and with them so did their voices, their dreams, and their questions. Nia, ever the guardian, became the quiet strategist of the family, always one step ahead to protect her sisters. Camille discovered a passion for painting. She painted their pain, their joy, their skin, their hope, covering the walls of their home with color that refused to be ignored. Jordan found peace in books, devouring stories where girls who looked like her could change the world. Tessa played basketball like it was war and worship combined, pouring her hurt and fire into every game. Maya sang beautifully, turning sorrow into something that soared, and little Hope, who had once clung to Thomas's leg in terror, now greeted him at the door with stories and laughter. But with adolescence came the weight of the world pressing harder against their shoulders. Racism wasn't theoretical. It was the look a teacher gave when Jordan raised her hand too confidently, or the snide comments at Tessa's games, questioning her attitude. At school they were whispered about. At church they were stared at. And always people asked the same question. Are they really his daughters? The hurt of that question lingered like a bruise no one could see. One night, Camille burst into tears after a friend's parent said she was lucky to be taken in. Taken in like she was stray furniture. Thomas held her tight and said, "You weren't taken in, you were chosen." But he wondered, was love enough to shield them from a world like this? What would you tell a child who's told she doesn't belong, even in the home she sleeps in? It was Nia who gave the answer, years later, when she came home from college and found Hope crying after being called a slur on the playground. Nia knelt beside her and said, "They don't get to tell you who you are. We've already decided. We're Avery girls, and Avery girls rise." And in that moment, Thomas realized something powerful. He hadn't just raised survivors. He was raising revolutionaries. It began with a cough, just a dry tickle in Thomas Avery's throat that he waved off as age or dust, or maybe too many late-night patrols from his old life. But as weeks passed, the fatigue deepened. His legs grew heavier, the stairs steeper, his laughter quieter. He skipped Maya's school concert, claiming a migraine. Ms. Tessa's basketball championship, blaming traffic. He thought he was hiding it well, until he collapsed in the middle of Camille's art exhibit right in front of a canvas she'd painted of their family. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and dread. 6 grown women surrounded his bed now, no longer the frightened children he'd once held in trembling arms. "Stage 3, the doctor said. Lung cancer." The room spun. Nia clutched his hand like a lifeline. "Why didn't you tell us, Dad?" He could barely speak. "Because I didn't want to be a burden." But love doesn't calculate weight. It carries it. And so, each daughter stepped forward, not just as kin, but as warriors. Nia, the social worker, took over the schedule. Doctors, chemo, insurance battles. Camille filled the hospital walls with murals of hope, her paintbrush defying despair. Jordan read to him daily, poems, scripture, letters from their past. Tessa became his trainer, walking him through quiet neighborhoods, urging his legs forward when his heart faltered. Maya sang to him on the worst days, her voice wrapping around his pain like silk. And Hope, his baby, never left his side, her jokes clumsy but her presence unshakable. Together they built a fortress around him, not of brick, but of devotion. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Thomas sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, Tessa beside him. "I used to think I was strong," she said quietly, "but watching you fight this, now I know where I get it from." Thomas turned to her, voice cracked with gratitude. "No, baby, I get it from you. Can love really give a person the strength to survive what the body alone cannot? In that house, on that porch?" The answer was yes, because when love comes full circle, it doesn't just heal, it repays. 5 years after Thomas Avery's cancer diagnosis, the Avery household was once again buzzing with not with sorrow, but with celebration. The girls, now women, had orchestrated something monumental, a surprise anniversary gala to honor the man who had given them everything. At the heart of the event stood a secret they'd guarded for over a year, a foundation in his name, dedicated to helping foster children of color find permanent loving homes. The day began with a simple lunch outing, Amara distracting him with laughter and stories, steering him away from suspicion. But when Thomas stepped into the community center that evening and was met with a thunderous surprise from a crowd of hundreds, churchgoers, old colleagues, children he'd mentored, even former skeptics, he stood frozen. Banners read, "The Thomas Avery Foundation, built on love." Tears filled his eyes as he turned to see his daughters beaming beneath the lights. The evening unfolded like a living tribute, a video montage of memories, testimonies from grateful neighbors, and heartfelt speeches from each daughter. Tessa, the once fiery teen, stood before the mic with trembling hands. "There was a time I didn't think you could understand me," she said. "But Dad, you never stopped trying, and that changed everything." Then came the moment, the unveiling of the foundation. Nia explained their mission, Camille revealed the logo, Jordan shared the first success story. "We're going to give other kids the same chance you gave us," Maya added. Hope, now in college, handed him a framed certificate. "This is your legacy." Thomas clutched it with shaking fingers, speechless. "What do you say when the love you gave quietly for decades returns to you tenfold?" He stood before the crowd and finally spoke, voice thick with awe. "I thought I was saving 6 little girls. Turns out, they saved me." Can you imagine living long enough to see your love ripple outward like that? To witness your private sacrifices become public blessings? That night, under the warm glow of string lights and surrounded by the women who once called him stranger but now call him Dad, Thomas Avery realized that the most powerful legacies aren't built from fortune. They're built from love that refuses to quit. On a quiet spring morning, as sunlight spilled gently over the porch of the Avery home, Thomas sat cradling his first grandchild, tiny, warm, and named Elaine, after the wife he lost and the dream that started it all. Around him, his daughters moved like the rhythm of a symphony they had written together over 2 decades of love, loss, growth, and unshakable commitment. Nia had become the state's director of child services, reforming the very system that once threatened to tear them apart. Camille's artwork now hung in museums, her latest series titled Chosen Family, drawing national praise. Jordan's novels told stories that echoed their truth, while Tessa, now a college coach, mentored young black girls the way Thomas had mentored her. Maya had launched a music therapy program for trauma survivors. And Hope, sweet, fierce Hope, had just finished police academy, determined to wear the badge differently than most. On that porch, generations mingled, past pain, present pride, and future promise. "You know," Thomas whispered, watching little Elaine coo in his arms, "I thought I was done with fatherhood the day I retired. Turns out, life had more to give." But it wasn't just about a baby or a rocking chair. It was about the ripple. The Avery family had become a lighthouse, their foundation supporting dozens of adoptions across the state, their story shared in churches, schools, and even congressional hearings. And Thomas, once a lonely widower in a badge, was now a symbol of something far bigger than himself. Can you imagine holding a child in your arms and knowing she'll grow up in a world better than the one you inherited because you helped change it? That night, the entire family gathered for dinner, laughter rising into the darkening sky. As Elaine slept peacefully against his chest, Thomas looked at the faces of the women he raised, so different, so radiant, so full of fire, and he knew. He had found his purpose, not in the uniform, but in the broken places he had dared to love. Legacy, he realized, isn't what we leave behind. It's who we lift up while we're still here. Sometimes, the family we're meant to have isn't the one we were born into. It's the one we choose with our hearts. Thomas Avery didn't set out to change the world. He simply answered a quiet call for love when no one else would, and in doing so, he built a life richer than anything he could have planned. His story reminds us that purpose doesn't always arrive in loud moments. It can come gently, through a knock at the door, or a child's question at the dinner table. It teaches us that love doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence, for trying, for showing up even when we don't have all the answers. At a time in life when many believe their impact is behind them, Thomas found his greatest meaning in the years he never expected. Maybe that's the truth for all of us, that it's never too late to open our arms, to listen deeper, or to give someone a place to belong. And in doing so, we just might find a piece of ourselves we didn't know was missing. Because in the end, love doesn't follow rules or timelines. It follows courage. In the stillness of twilight, Thomas Avery sat on his porch swing with his granddaughter asleep against his chest, her breath soft, her presence steady. No speeches, no crowds, just the quiet power of love that had endured. Through sorrow and struggle, he had built something unshakable, not from perfection, but from devotion. Around him, laughter drifted from the kitchen where his daughters, once called unwanted, now stood as women who carried grace, fire, and the strength to rewrite history. What came next wasn't just healing, it was continuation. The foundation in his name would keep growing, the book he had written would keep teaching, and the stories etched into his family's journey would echo far beyond their small town. Because silence, when unchallenged, becomes permission. But love, when lived out loud, becomes legacy. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.